So I realized recently that I have a problem, and it's that there really is no good solution to mount a GoPro to the chin of a motorcycle helmet. I recently got this helmet. It's the Aero Aviator Ace, and one of the things I initially realized about it was that the top of it here is too rounded to mount the GoPro on with the traditional mounts. And I've always wanted to have the GoPro mounted on the chin anyways, because it gives you that lower perspective that makes the terrain look a little bit more realistic in the footage anyways. The problem that I've been having is that all the mounts on the market today are super generic. I've used this one, the Pro Shot, which is just big and bulky, and I'm not a huge fan of this. There's also the version that straps around here, just kind of masks over the front of the helmet, but I've broken those, and so I'm not a huge fan of those either. GoPro has a version which doesn't work with this helmet because it's so angular and rigid that there's no good place to put the mount, and it's just an arm that comes over the front that the GoPro can mount to, which to me doesn't seem very robust, and if you ever crashed on a dirt bike you'd probably just rip it off. There's also a design out there which is basically a clip that clamps on the bottom. I'm just not a huge fan of that either, because I'm not really willing to trust my $400 GoPro to a spring that's not really securely mounted to the helmet. So for all those reasons, I decided to embark on this journey of making my own GoPro chin mount. I made it out of a piece of 1.5 inch aluminum flat bar. It took a little bit of doing, just fabricating to make it work. It wasn't too bad. You'll need all the basic hand tools, but pretty much everybody out there should be able to make one of these. I think it's a far superior design. One of the things that I really like about it is that it allows you to mount the GoPro in an upright position rather than underneath here. And that allows it to be kind of out of the way. If you look down, it doesn't hit you in the chest, and I feel like it's just a more kind of secure position. And it allows you to also stand up and also get that same kind of perspective without having to worry about just aiming the GoPro down at the ground. So I'm going to show you guys how I did this today. I think this is a great design. I think everybody should have one of these. So hope you learned something and you make one as well. So for this project, you're going to need quite a few different hand tools. Depending on the helmet you're making this for, it may vary a little bit depending on your specific helmet, but these are all the tools that I used for this project. So the first thing you're going to want to do is cut off a 6-inch length of your aluminum flat bar here. So now that I have a 6-inch length here, what I want to do is I want to mark 3 inches here, so right in the center. Then I'm going to make a line on that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in the vise, and I'm going to bend it at a 90-degree angle so that it fits to the front of my helmet. One thing to think about when you're selecting the aluminum is that it's a lot easier to do this with a thinner piece of aluminum. This stuff is really way too thick for what I'm trying to do here. It'll work just fine, but if you had something that was about half this thick, like you can see with some of these first versions that I was making it with, they're not nearly as thick as this one. You can do it this way. It's like I said, it's not really that big a deal, but it's a lot easier to work with the aluminum when it's a little bit thinner. So you can see there, it's about 90 degrees perfectly. It could go a little bit more, but that's a good starting bend for right now. And I'll be able to bend it more later as I get the aluminum trimmed up a little bit. What I'm trying to do is match it to these grooves here in the helmet, so that this will sit on here, and then I'll trim this up on both sides to correspond with these grooves here. And then I will also want to take some out so that it doesn't interfere with this piece here. So for my helmet, I'm going to make a mark at 11/16, and I'm designating this as sort of the top. So I'm going to measure down from that. I'm going to do that on both sides. So I think when the thing is done, it's going to sit about like that. So I'm going to make a mark right about here on this one side, because that's about where this kind of angle here ends. I want to measure how far in that is, which in this case is about 2 1/4 inch. I want to mark this side as well at 2 1/4 inch. And really what I'm trying to do here is, as much as possible, make this thing symmetrical, so that way it looks good when I put it on there. Call it right about there. That looks to be just under 1 inch. I can give it a little bit of play. I think I'm going to call it 1 inch even. So I'll mark 1 inch there, and then I'll go to this side and I'll mark another inch there. And then I need to decide how deep to go. About 7/8 inch. I'm going to start with 7/8 inch, and if I need to go deeper after that, I can. Alright, so now that you have the aluminum piece here mostly trimmed up to fit to the helmet here, the next kind of part of this is to shape the aluminum so that it fits flush to the helmet, because the more the aluminum piece here fits to the helmet, the more mounting surfaces you're going to have, and the better it's going to stick in the long run. And you can see it's mostly there. But the helmet in some areas is just a little bit rounded, and so what I want to do is just spend some time making sure that it is as flush to the helmet as it can be. This is really where it's nicer to have some thinner aluminum. It's going to be a bit more of a job with this thicker stuff, but I think I can still get it done. This helmet through this area is pretty near straight on both sides, obviously, but it does just have the slightest bend to it. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to set this on here, and I want to take a look and see where the aluminum starts to move away from the curve of the helmet. And looks like right about there. Looks to be about 1 inch and 3/8. And then I want to just take and ever so slightly bend this in. That almost never happens, but it looks like I've pretty much gotten that bend just about perfect here. You can see there's not a lot of daylight between those two surfaces. There's a slight decline here at the top of this. I'm going to use a crescent wrench here, and I'm just going to take and I'm going to bend this ever so slightly in. Now let's see how much that's affected it. Alright, that is perfect. You can see here along both of these leading edges here, it's perfectly seated against the helmet, and I don't have to bend or tweak it at all. It doesn't quite seat up perfectly here in the nose, but I'm not so worried about that. The biggest mounting surface obviously is here along these sides, and that's where I want to try to really make sure it has good contact, because it's going to get most of its security from right here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make the mount for the front. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a U-shaped piece of aluminum, and it's going to come out like that. It's going to go across and then down, and I'm going to use some aluminum brazing rod, and I'm going to braze it to this surface here. So I want to make the mount sit on here, just on the outside of this V-shaped cut. So I need to decide how wide to make it. That looks to be about 1.5 inches. The other thing is I need to decide how far out from the face of this I need it to sit so that it clears the nose here. And that looks to be about 1 inch. So 3.5 inches altogether. And then I'm going to cut this off. While I'm here, I can also mark 1 inch from this outer edge and then 1 inch from this outer edge. And those will mark my bend points so that I can fold this end up and I can fold this end up. Yeah, you can tell there that, try as I might, that bend isn't a perfect 90 degrees. It's not so bad that I'm worried about it, and I can also tell that this arm is just a little bit longer than this one. But in the end, it should sit on here like this. So I'm gonna spend a little time working on this with the belt sander and try to trim it up so that it's nice and level. Since this is a little bit thicker aluminum, one of the things I'm noticing when I try to stick this on here is that there's a pretty noticeable gap here along this edge. So what I'm going to try to do is take out some of this inner material here on both sides of the inner side of the U here, so that this will fit up flush to the edge here. So there you can see it's a lot closer to being a flush fit with this surface here. So this next part, the best way I figured to do it is just to eyeball it. But basically what I'm trying to do is make sure that when I get this mount on here with the brazing rod, that it's actually straight, so that this thing's pointing out straight from the front of the helmet and it's not kind of cocked to one side or the other. That to me looks pretty dang close. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a pencil and I'm just going to mark both of these edges. And that way I have a reference point when I stick it in the vise and go to put the brazing rod on there. I've got this leading edge lined up with that line that I made. And the next thing I'm going to use is this aluminum brazing rod. If you're worried about this brazing rod not being strong enough, here's one successful attempt that I made on a previous design that I decided I don't like anymore. I'm going to try to break this with my fingers. Ugh! Nada. So I'm going to flip it over now, and I'm going to do this side. This thing has cooled down from being molten lava, and now I'm going to try to find the exact center of this piece here, and then I'm going to drill a hole through it. So there, it's mostly done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over to the belt sander. I'm going to knock off all the rough edges, make everything kind of nice and even and symmetrical. Alright, so I've knocked off most of the rough edges now. I'm just going to take it to the hand file, and then I'm going to knock off anything that's left with some sandpaper. So I've spent quite a bit of time sanding this down. I started with some 150 grit sandpaper, and then I finished off with some 320 grit sandpaper. So it's all nice and smooth. I rinsed it off with some soapy water, so I got all the aluminum powder off. And now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to paint it. And the next part of doing this is trying to figure out how you want to mount the GoPro tripod mount to the front here. Now, there's basically two ways you could look at this. Either you can mount the GoPro this way, or you can go mount the GoPro this way. And like I mentioned earlier, I've designed this so that the GoPro mounts to the front rather than underneath here, is so that when you look down, the GoPro doesn't hit you in the chest. And so I think what I would like to do is mount the GoPro this way, so that way it's not even hanging down here kind of in front of me. It's kind of up here where I can see it. If I'm talking, I can get good reception, or I can pick up the audio through here. If I mount it down here in front of me, there's still kind of a chance that it might hit me in the chest if I look down far enough. When you're riding, obviously you're looking down most of the time, especially when you're standing. I mean, you are looking out in front of you, but for the most part, your head is tipped down, and the whole angle, the direction of the angle is tilted down. And so really what this looks like when the GoPro is mounted and it's pointed in the right direction when you're standing, the GoPro is tilted out this way. So if you're going to mount it on top here, you have to tip it back pretty far in order to get the right angle and actually see something other than your handlebars. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this. You can see this GoPro mount has more range this way than it does this way. And that's just because of where these mounting points are. I want to mount the GoPro mount this way, because regardless of if I have the GoPro here or here, if I have it this way, it's going to be tilted out anyways, and if I have it up here, I'm going to want it tilted back as far as possible. And what I've realized is that this GoPro mount doesn't have quite the range, because when you have the GoPro actually in the mount here and you tip it back, it actually hits on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim up the mount a little bit. Not enough to compromise the integrity, but I just want to take the top off here. And then I also need to kind of take a little bit out here, because the back rim frame of the GoPro hits on the back here, and then this hits up against the glass. But basically what I want to do is make it so that the glass of the GoPro is just barely off of this here, so that it's not rubbing up against it, but so that I can get this GoPro tilted back as far as possible. The other thing you're going to want to watch out for in this is that depending on where you mount it on the nose of the helmet or the chin of the helmet, the GoPro could potentially come back and hit against here somewhere. So part of the reason why I've made this so that the frame for the mount sticks off a little bit is so that you can tilt this back as far as possible without having to worry about the GoPro hitting the helmet. So tighten that down, and there you can see that pretty much folds all the way back to the glass. It's not quite touching the actual glass itself, which is good, because I don't want it to potentially get hit and then come back and crack the rear glass here. It may also be a good idea to put something along this edge here to kind of give it some cushion if necessary. I can see I still have, I don't know, maybe about 1/8 of an inch there between the helmet and the top of the GoPro. So I've really got about as much range of motion out of that mount as I can possibly get. And I think that angle is high enough so that even as my head is tilted down, I'll be able to get a good field of view from the camera.
kind of did what I was trying to do.
That's what I'm thinking. If we can get just up on that ridge facing that way with like a little speed, dude, like we might be able to get across right there, you know?
I'm going to go ahead and put this double-sided mounting tape on this surface here, and that's going to stick to the helmet. There's different brands of this. This is the Gorilla brand. There's also 3M, which is what GoPro uses for their mounts. And the difference is the thickness. You can get this at pretty much any hardware store, and I'm pretty sure you can get double-sided mounting tape from 3M on Amazon. But depending on how flush your mount is with the helmet, you may want to consider getting something that's just a little bit thicker, so that way it kind of takes up some of the difference between the helmet and the mount. But that's just a kind of call you're going to have to make for your helmet specifically, and how your mount turns out. But this stuff works pretty good. It's got a 30-pound capacity, which is definitely more than enough for the weight of the GoPro. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you have any thoughts or questions on this project, you can put those in the comment section below. Otherwise, I hope you found this video useful and an inspiration for if you decide to make a GoPro chin mount of your own for your helmet. I'm going to go ahead and put all of the links to the tools and the materials I used in this project in the description below, so you can go ahead and have access to that easily. Of course, like this video and subscribe to our channel if you like the videos that we're putting out. We really appreciate it. Thanks.